back at it again with another tutorial. In this one, first we're going to explain to you before we get to multidimensional arrays. I'm going to show you how a regular array works because they work kind of different than your regular variables, which we call primitive types. So your primitive types, are your integers, your floats, your longs, your booleans, whatever it's called in your respective language. Those are just your value. So those are your variables that have single values. So they hold just one thing, like one character, or one true or false value, or one integer, or one decimal number. So those are what considered primitive types because they only store that one individual value. So at any given time, a variable could only have one possible state that it could exist in. So what happens is, when we want to use these variables, so for instance, we have a variable called a, we can set that to the value 1. So anytime we use our variable a, it will then insert that value 1. So that's really simple if you want to do things, like create b and then set b equal to a. It will take this value 1 and stick it into b. But how do we, represent this inside our computers in memory? So what it does is it gives each of these variables just one block, essentially, of memory to store that value. It's a little bit different than that, but that's the kind of high-level thing we're going to go here. We'll just represent, we won't get to the specifics of how it's stored, but just know each variable is going to get one block of memory where it will store its value. So what happens, when we have a collection of values? There's two ways we can really do that in programming. So that first way is with arrays. So you can have this array called numbers. And then, we can store an array of numbers. So we'll just do like 1, 2, and 3. So now we created an array, which is just going to be a list of numbers equal to 1, 2, and 3. But if what I just said is that variables only store one value at a time, how can we take all three of these individual values and store them into numbers and still be able to get to these? So instead, the way we store collections is we store the actual values somewhere else in memory of our computer, and then the actual variable itself, the value inserted in here, is now that location of where this data will start. So this is the same way objects work as well. Say I had, like a cat object. Sorry about that, cat. So I have cat 1. And cat 1, could have values such as, name, age, and maybe like height. So this is a set of values. We'll call it collection again. So this is 3 different values. Just like we have up here in numbers, we have 3 different values here as well. And since we can't store these 3 distinct values into just one value, we instead we make an object, that location of where this data will start. So as far as referencing these values in our code, that's why we have things, such as the different operators. So, if we're using an array, we will type the value of that variable for the array, and then we will use these square brackets. These square brackets, we then put a number in here to tell it which index we want. Because this says, hey, go to get the value at numbers, which will be the value that says, hey, where does this data start? And it says, hey, with that value, we want to get an item from that collection. We want to get the 0 index, which is going to be the first thing in that collection of things that's located at this location. So likewise, if I said 2, that says, hey, go find the value of numbers, which will be, for this instance, to say 1001. So it says go to the location 1001 in memory, which would be starting here at this variable 1. And it says go grab the second thing that's in the list of items at that location. So it says, hey, start at 1001, go and get 2 things over. So we'll go 1, 2, and so 2 things over is the variable 3. And so anytime we use this in our code, we'll get the value 3 printed out. And likewise, you know, if we had an object, if I wanted to access name for cat, I'd do cat1, and I could do name. And although these aren't a list of values that all share the same, you know, data typing like that, we still know because cat1 is a instance of our cat class. Our cat class knows that we'll only have these three different values, and it knows that's going to store these three values in the same order. Because of that, when we say cat1, we'll go and get that location. So this might be at location 902. So go to location 902, and this dot operator then says, hey, we're going to want a specific element at that collection. And so we'll say we want the thing called name. And cat knows that name is going to be the first thing in that collection. And so we'll say go to 9002 and grab the first thing at that location, which will be name. Likewise, if we want to get height, we'll go to location 9001, and then it says, hey, heights will be the third thing in our collection. So go to 9001, 9002, 9003, and now here's our value height. And that's really the basics of how arrays are work and how they're stored in memory and how they're kind of accessed. And so what happens when we move into multidimensional arrays is we're not doing anything different than what a regular array is. We're just changing how many times we had to do a lookup to find the data that we're looking for. Because again, as we just showed and explained, numbers is not an actual list of all these values. The value of numbers is instead the location at where this list of stuff starts. So likewise, we can have an array that has values of other arrays because those array values themselves are just locations which have a singular value, which we can then have a collection of single values again. So I'll explain that a little bit more in the next video. So I'll see you guys later.